Here it is. They were hiding the mic from me. My name is Walter Bosley. I'm the publisher at Lost Continent Library. I'm the publisher of the book written by the man you're about to see this afternoon. He'll be signing his book afterwards over in the vendor room. He asked me to say a few words. They aren't few, but I'll make it quick. The world we know began 114 years ago at a seminal event officially named the Columbian Exposition, and popularly remembered as the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. It was there that people saw a city lit up at night artificially for the first time in known history. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair was the actual first year of the 20th century, and likely beyond. Nikola Tesla alone, the man who created the system that illuminated the fair, showed all fair attendees the promise of a world of wonders powered by energy drawn from the electromagnetic power of the earth itself. This 1893 Chicago World's Fair introduced the world to Cracker Jack and Aunt Jemima pancakes, only two examples of the label identification era that was to propel consumerism to the height of its current madness. It was the first of the great pleasure fairs, serving as the model for all World's Fairs to come, and the inspiration for the amusement park, which saw its greatest expression in Disneyland, the world's most famous pleasure fair. Walt Disney heard stories in childhood of the great 1893 Chicago World's Fair from his father, who helped build it. City planners across this nation for decades to come referred to this singular year-long event for their inspiration in laying out the metropolises, big and small, across the United States. The most recent phenomenon directly resulting from the influence of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair is that of the shopping mall, now the shopping complex. Take a look into the past and you may be astonished at how much your local shopping complex looks like the Great Columbian Exposition of 1893, right down to the landscape parks and amusements and pennants flying over dramatic architecture. Americans journeyed across several states to see the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, including Mark Twain, whose diary during his trip inspired the scenario of the story you're about to hear more of today. They came, as they do today, to the monumental shopping and amusement centers inspired by it. People came from around the world to see the 1893 World's Fair, as they do today to see Disneyland, its greatest successor. This 1893 Chicago World's Fair and the powerful influence it had on the public did not go unnoticed. Certain men paid very close attention to the effect the event held over millions. They saw in the 1893 World's Fair a vision of a future where men, women, and children founded their social lives around the merchant center. Through pleasing vistas and entertaining backdrops, they could set the stage for manipulation of mass numbers of people, manipulation that ultimately has led to our credit-based society, wherein families who find themselves short on 1 week's income teeter precariously on the edge of financial ruin. All so they can possess the cars, clothes, computers, and games the merchants tell you that you must have to be happy. They have succeeded in turning our society into an illiterate mob of TV addicts who read books based on computer games and who would rather watch their fellow citizens behave like heathens than see Shakespeare or read poetry. The fair became the shopping complex and the amusements became merely another pitchman to sell the products. Spend yourselves into oblivion as long as you feel you're in another world doing it. It is a heinous bastardization of a wonderful event in another, likely better, time. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair was the last time, possibly, the public could see the truth unobscured by the greed of powerful men. Since that day, we have been lied to by the power companies who have enslaved us, suppressing lifetime light bulbs, limitless electric power for merely the price of an apparatus built to last, instant global communications for free, and space flight, all based on technologies demonstrated at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. We have been lied to by the politicians serving their personal wealth by allowing industry and commerce to enslave us to the combustion engine for over a century and lead us into wars under false pretenses to serve secret agendas while making billions of dollars on the machineries of death. We've been lied to by the priesthoods of academia and religious institutions serving their egos. What should have been a gateway event into a glorious future of freedom was instead turned into a ruse to keep our eyes off what was really going on, and thereby enslave us to the addiction of manipulated consumerism. Make no mistake, there is a curtain between us and the truth, and someone stands behind it, working the levers of our present condition. It's time now for us to draw back that curtain and reveal the face of our tormentors who have studied, toyed with, and drawn their plans against us. The same men who suppressed the genius of Nikola Tesla and the freedoms it promised to us all have their masters to serve. The masters of their greed and arrogance are those who have lied to us through the ages, those who have treated us with cold indifference, and who now lead too many people into a delusion that they are benevolent space brothers here to help bring us paradise. As long as we surrender everything that could possibly defend us from their tyranny. Only then will they show their faces to the world. In the meantime, a few have seen the hideous countenance in the night, coldly lurking in the shadows where their treachery goes greatly unbelieved by the distracted masses, obsessed with the purposely elusive satisfaction they seek every weekend at their nearby shopping complex. It is time to wake up. For the past 114 years, we have been inhabiting a landscape on the border between dreams and nightmares. Rub your eyes, prop yourselves up, and listen. What you will hear today will be familiar to some, will make others angry, will make many laugh, but will also astonish yet more. I published this man's first book because I love adventure fiction, and it is great adventure fiction. I did not know what an adventure it would become for my life, and it astonishes me every day I watch it unfold. Mysteries I have explored for almost 30 years are more clear. Suspicions I held since childhood have been validated. It has only begun for me, the possibilities. I invite you to explore this world of wonders, and I am honored to introduce you to the author of Wonder of the Worlds, Mr. Sesh Heri.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you today. I've attended a few UFO conferences over the years, but this is my first time speaking at a conference specifically dedicated to the subject of UFOs. Like so many of you out there, I have had a strong, persistent, driving, lifelong interest in trying to understand the UFO phenomenon. And like so many people who have had such a strong interest in this subject, my deep connection to UFOs was the result of my own direct personal encounters with these mysterious objects and the entities who control them. I'll be speaking about some of my experiences and views a bit today and relate them to the work I've been doing in the last few years in the arts and sciences. Most particularly, I'll be discussing my new novel about Nikola Tesla entitled Wonder of the Worlds. It's my view that the UFO phenomenon is a unique key in our times to unlocking the door to some of the greatest philosophical mysteries which have confronted the human race throughout the ages. Who are we? How did we get here? What is our place in the universe? And what is our destiny within it? Perhaps we can't answer these questions in full, but perhaps with the key of the UFO phenomenon, we may begin to gather some important clues. But we must be willing to look at the facts honestly and empirically, without any preconceived prejudices derived from the conventional paradigms of established science, religion, and politics. This is not to abandon science, religion, and politics, but to rethink all of them in new and dynamic ways. The late Dr. Carl Sagan used to say, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." I say extraordinary claims don't require extraordinary proof if you're honest and wide awake and not hypnotized to the prevailing paradigm. It's enough to show that something is probably happening, or very probably happening, before we take action to investigate such claims further. Today, what I'll be presenting are my views on the UFO phenomenon, which I've pieced together through the years using many different means: personal experience, field research, reading, and talking to people, so that a consistent pattern has emerged within a huge body of connected evidence. Can I prove every detail of what I'm saying here with hardware that I can put in your hands? No. But I don't need to. And if you just look into some of these matters for yourselves, I think you'll agree that I don't need to. The year 1947 has become a benchmark for many who study UFOs. We all know about Roswell. We all know about Kenneth Arnold. In my view, 1947 is an important date because that's when the powers controlling the UFO phenomenon decided to make themselves publicly known. This introduction of UFOs to mass consciousness was an event staged by the beings who control the UFOs. It was a complex event involving non-humans, humans at the highest levels of political power, mass media, and ordinary people. I suggest you reconsider 1947. Consider that Roswell was not a crash. Consider that Kenneth Arnold's UFO sighting was not accidental. Think in terms of theater and ritual initiation. The mass of humanity, especially the citizens of the United States, were ritually initiated through the staging of a grand theatrical play into the knowledge that a non-human but intelligent race of beings was present among us on our planet. This was shocking knowledge in 1947. Actually, it's shocking knowledge today. Although Steven Spielberg has planted the idea in mass consciousness that ETs are cute and cuddly, most people can only entertain the possibility of alien visitation. An actual official admission of ET existence would send a shock wave through the world, which would even pass through this very room and reach you and me. Certainly, esoteric groups have always accepted the existence of non-human intelligence, angels, demons, fairies, and even humanoid beings from other planets. But these groups were always marginal, on the fringes of society. In June of 1947, people across the U.S., by the literal thousands, witnessed an armada of UFOs flying in the skies above our cities and towns. This is a fact that can be confirmed by looking at any newspaper archive and looking at the front pages of the papers for that month of June 1947. Not only were people seeing UFOs everywhere that June of 1947, but major newspapers and wire services were reporting on this event. It climaxed with Kenneth Arnold and Roswell. Did people stop seeing UFOs in large numbers after that? Did ET suddenly pack up and go home? No. The media just stopped reporting on it. But rather than viewing this stoppage as the beginning of a UFO news censorship, consider the idea that the initial reportage of UFO sightings was intentionally allowed and encouraged. Somebody wanted you or your parents or your grandparents to know about these flying saucers, even if you and they hadn't seen one. Theater, initiation, secret ET human contact. collaboration, planning, marketing, and stage managing the really big show of 1947. Or maybe ETs are just bad pilots. They're always crashing their saucers near the most powerful military installations on a planet. Sort of an intergalactic Moe, Larry, and Curly, huh? I don't think so. Okay, that's 1947. Was 1947 the first time that ETs or EBE or whatever you want to call them, was 1947 the first time the non-humans came to Earth? No, that was just the script. Let's call it the first contact scenario. Was there another first contact? The first contact? Well, yes, it has happened throughout our history. It happened some 50 years before Roswell. It's called the Great Airship Mystery of 1896. But it happened long before then, too. It happened in ancient Egypt. It happened in Sumeria. It happened in India. And yes, it happened in Atlantis. It's an old story. And part of it is true. The part about the non-humans being here on Earth. That they've just arrived, that part, I wouldn't believe that part for a minute. The non-humans have always been here on Earth and in the vicinity of our planet, on the moon, an ancient artificial satellite where many of them reside, deep under the surface of the Earth in a vast network of ancient tunnels, underground on the planet Mars, and in gigantic space stations or motherships in our solar system. Where are they from? Well, let's say they're from here, as much as they're from anywhere. They get around and do it in a way you'd never notice, unless they wanted you to notice. So think about it. If you've seen a real alien saucer or ship, it's because they wanted you to see them. It's theater and initiation. The same is true with the cattle mutilations and the human mutilations and the crop circles. Although there is a great deal of hoaxing and disinformation going on with these things, at the core of it all is non-human involvement. But you might say, wait a minute. The Space Brothers don't mutilate humans. I say brothers kill brothers. Think of Cain and Abel. Think of any war on Earth. The truth is, the non-humans, or at least many of them, have done and are doing some very bad things. And no matter how much some UFO researchers try to put a positive spin on ET, this disturbing fact remains with us. ETs mutilate animals, which you hear about. And they mutilate humans, which you hardly ever hear anything about because it's just too damn scary. And it's not part of the scenario of first contact. It's not in the script. It's definitely not in the script which cast ETs as merely slightly more advanced versions of humans doing slightly more advanced scientific experiments in order to build a better mousetrap or a better genome to export to Alpha Centauri or Zeta Reticuli. I call the ETs non-humans to emphasize that they are truly alien. Nothing like us. They have non-human aims and agendas, and many of these agendas fall completely outside our philosophically inadequate and naive model of scientific materialism. which equates magic with superstition, ignorance, unreality, and fantasy. The non-humans are magicians par excellence. And the reason they engage in cattle mutilations and human mutilations and create crop circles and abduct people, especially young children, is that they are engaged in a super scientific practice of ritual slaughter and ritual magic. But for some people, even for many UFO researchers, this idea is too far outside the perimeters of their mental conditioning and hypnosis into a materialistic view of reality. Some researchers have focused upon the Gray's work in creating hybrids composed of the genes of humans and non-humans. These researchers take the Gray's statements at face value concerning the Gray's motives for creating these hybrids. The Grays say they're making the hybrids to prepare for a discontinuous event coming to the earth. Well, we are faced with just such a discontinuous event. Our world is dangerously overpopulated, and it's heating up, causing a greater incidence of earthquakes. Also, the magnetic field is weakening. Many species of animals are becoming extinct. Man-made pollution is destroying life on this earth. And if that's not bad enough, we have a swarm of comets and asteroids headed our way in a few years. Some of them might hit the earth. Some very probably will hit the earth. So are we faced with a discontinuity? Yes. But does that mean that I think that the ETs are going to use this discontinuity to replace us with hybrids after a worldwide cataclysm strikes? No. Worldwide cataclysms have struck our planet many times before in the past, and we humans have continued to exist on this earth. There is a larger destiny for mankind which is not in the control of the Greys. The creation of hybrids is part of the Greys' magical work, but they don't want us to know that they're doing magic, because that's where the real power is. So they give abductees cover stories about the reasons they're making these hybrids, and the UFO researchers who do hypnotic regressions swallow them whole because they're interpreting the phenomenon from their own deeply ingrained materialistic view of reality, a view that is so deeply ingrained that the researchers are not even aware that their view is coloring their interpretations. They think they're doing objective research. The same is true of these researchers' claims that UFO abductions are happening, but the government doesn't know anything about it. That's incredible and absurd. Of course, the government knows about it. They know all about it. Consider the idea that the non-humans have been on Earth a long time, a very long time, and that they know a lot about us, maybe more than we know about ourselves. They're not doing genetic experiments with us to learn about us. They're developing us genetically, the way a winemaker develops the grape, and the way an alchemist develops the base metals to create the philosopher's stone. We're the subject of the Greys' work, not the purpose of it. We're a means to their end. This entity abducted a 6-year-old child several times in the middle of the night and put that child through a terrifying experience each time. Can any end justify such means? Can any child be so unwillingly sacrificed to some cause, unwillingly on his part, unwillingly on his parents' part if they knew? No. In any conceivable system of morality, informed consent is an absolute principle of which there can be no compromise whatsoever. This thing here is not a moral entity. No matter how intelligent it is, no matter how much power it has, it is not a moral entity. In fact, its intelligence and its power makes its crimes all the worse. It and its cohorts are collectively guilty because these things have a group mind and a group will. They are telepathic creatures of the hive, like a bee or an ant. Only these things are extremely intelligent as a group. They consider us their property, and perhaps we are by their superior force, but we're not their property in any moral sense. These beings have far overstepped their moral authority. What did these things want with a 6-year-old child? It seems that they were feeding off the child's emotions, possibly using the child as a kind of transducer of emotional and psychic energy in order to carry out some kind of extremely arcane act of super scientific black magic. You see, the abduction phenomenon is part of a continuum of activities that include the mutilations and the crop circles. To see only the first layer of this phenomenon is to swallow the disinformation, hook, line, and sinker, the non-human disinformation. These entities show the child a lot of imagery. Now, some might interpret that as a teaching, but it could more consistently be described as a highly scientific form of torture and stimulus to evoke a spectrum of emotional responses. These gray things are fascinated with our human emotions and our individual wills. I'd go so far to say that they are extremely envious of our individuality. These abduction sessions are often about absorbing psychic energy, either through direct psychic contact or by extracting biological samples which contain the vital human energies. The child learns some things in the process, but does that mean that the process was meant for the benefit of the child and that the space brothers were his friends, as some UFO researchers have suggested? No, that's absurd. The process was meant to benefit these entities that come for us in the night and in the day and reach into our very minds and read our every thought. The child was lured into his backyard at night by these entities, imitating the voice of his former kindergarten teacher. Can you imagine the wicked cunning of such a deception? They do great impressions. They can reach into your minds and read your thoughts, tap into your memories, and stimulate the aural centers of your brain to make you think you're hearing a voice. They can really fool you, like making you think they're the good guys. They're not the good guys. How bad are they? Very bad. But that doesn't mean that they intend to destroy us as a race of beings. You see, Charles Fort had it right. You don't destroy your own property. But you might want to try to improve it according to your own ideas of improvement. That's what these things are up to in regard to us. They keep tinkering with us according to their own desires and agendas, not according to our own best interest, as they did with this child in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Oh, by the way, that child was me. According to rumors, it seems that the human scientists who have studied these gray entities have concluded that they represent some kind of devolved species or an evolutionary dead end. Well, I don't know about that, but they certainly represent a spiritual dead end. Ironically, even though these grays have very advanced technology, in many ways, we humans are really a more advanced kind of being. We are each an individual unit of will and a microcosm of the larger macrocosm of the universe. The grays, as individuals, are only fragments. We should keep this in mind. We should always remember that we humans have great power in our spirits, souls, hearts, and minds. The grays know this, and they know that there are limits to what they can do in regard to us, especially if we're aware of their existence and apprised of their intentions and activities. We have our own psychic defense powers, of which most of us are not aware. In my case, I was always waking up in the middle of their hypnosis and recognizing them for the monsters that they were. The grays need our voluntary agreement in order to make their magic work. That's why they use deception and lies. That's why they get humans to sign secret treaties. If you know anything about magic, you know that such an agreement has psychic power. So don't give them that power. You have the power. Keep your power, use it against them, and own your own soul. And this is true of any psychic vampirism, non-human or human. There is also a larger control system involved here, of which the grays are only a part. The grays are kept in check by that system. I'll speak a bit more about this larger control system later when I discuss Nikola Tesla. I think it'd be fair to say that the grays and their hybrids represent a spiritual dead end, while the human race represents the potentialities of the future. Some kind of human has existed on Earth for a very long time, perhaps millions of years, but our own particular lineage of humanity is a young species, and we have only begun to tap our potential talents and powers. I've just completed writing a new book entitled The Handprint of Atlas. I discuss some of my early UFO encounters in the book, along with some other unusual experiences. As I said earlier, I think the UFO phenomenon is a key to understanding many philosophical mysteries, and one reason I think this is so is that the UFO phenomenon is part of a continuum of reality which has come to be called paranormal. The term paranormal itself was coined, really, to deny the existence of certain parts of reality. Throughout our history, the controlling forces of our planet have had a long-standing agenda to keep mankind's knowledge and vision extremely limited. That's why we know so little about our past and are so confused about our present and future. So when we see something like a giant face on Mars or artificial constructions on the moon, we're conditioned to reject their reality. We have been literally hypnotized since infancy to believe that humanity is all alone on this planet and has always been alone. As a species of beings, we have especially been hypnotized to believe this in the last 500 years. We have been so totally immersed in this hypnotic belief system that we are unable to see the obvious evidence for non-human presence, as well as the obvious evidence for the historical existence of the ancient, technically advanced civilizations, such as Atlantis. Here is Lake Victoria on the African continent. because of hypnosis and policies of secrecy, our scientists have not been able to publicly acknowledge that Lake Victoria is a crater lake, and it is artificial. Remember the great push in the 19th century to find the source of the Nile? Why was that so important? Lake Victoria was not formed by a meteor, but by a large artificial object striking the surface of the earth, following an intelligently directed trajectory. Not only is Lake Victoria an artificial crater lake, it is the mark left on the surface of the earth from when the Earth's rotational axis was shifted just a few thousand years ago. You're looking at the strike site of a massive tangential impact which literally wrenched our planet into a new direction of rotation. I call this the Handprint of Atlas. I've studied geomorphology for over 20 years, and I can tell you conclusively that the geomorphology of Central Africa is not the result of the dynamics of continental drift. Its geomorphology is discontinuous with all the rest of Earth's continental land masses, and its cause is unquestionably artificial and recent. This gigantic spiral shape, centered on the western shores of Lake Victoria, is the result of a massive tangential impact moving west to east and twisted the surface of Central Africa from that point to twist the surface, actually force the planet into a new rotational direction. And the continental landmass of Central Africa is millions of years old. But this gigantic spiral shape forming Lake Victoria, the Great Rift Valley, and the three mountains to the east of Lake Victoria, all of this is the result of a force that changed the shape in an instant, twisting at that point and changing the whole axis of the Earth. Seismic tomography maps show that there is a hot plume extending from the surface of Lake Victoria all the way down to the planet's core, just as it would be at a recent massive strike site such as this. There is also a hot region under the whole longitude upon which Lake Victoria and the Great Pyramid are positioned, showing that the Earth has recently been subjected to tremendous stress along this north-south line. It's clear that this strike was artificially engineered. It's on the same longitude as the Great Pyramid, the unique longitude which crosses more solid landmass than any other. In terms of mechanical compression forces, this longitude is the ideal position from which to impress a force to produce a maximum effect of translational mechanical stress. Further confirming evidence that this was an artificial strike are the three near equally sized mountains east of Lake Victoria, which were clearly created as a result of the incoming object breaking into three precisely equal parts to produce a symmetrical balance of mechanical forces resulting in a precisely focused vector. Lake Victoria is positioned precisely on the equator because it is a record of the force that created our present equator. There are ancient legends which record the approach in the sky of this three-headed cosmic body and what happened when it struck the Earth. If you think that the face on Mars is hard to accept, try wrapping your mind around the concept that the very position of the Earth's rotational axis is artificial and recently established. This is one of the things which I have discovered in my researches, and it is explained in detail in my new book, which I've just finished writing, The Handprint of Atlas, which will be published by Adventures Unlimited Press. I also touch upon some of these ideas in my new novel about Nikola Tesla, entitled Wonder of the Worlds. Wonder of the Worlds has been published by Lost Continent Library, and it's a work of fiction. It's available for purchase today here at the conference. There is much fact in Wonder of the Worlds, fantastic fact, unbelievable fact. And I'd like to take the rest of my time today here to tell you about Wonder of the Worlds. The cover art up there is by artist Bob All. It depicts the Statue of the Republic on the grounds of the Chicago World's Fair, seeming to meditate in a nighttime dreamscape upon the mysteries of Mars, the planet of war. Of what mysteries and wonders could this lone figure be dreaming? Wonder of the Worlds is about the legendary inventor and scientist Nikola Tesla, who gave us our modern world with his civilization-founding inventions of alternating current electricity and radio. What eclipsed Tesla's fame to such an extent that today even most educated people are only vaguely aware of Tesla's name as belonging to somebody who invented some kind of electrical coil and nothing more? That question and its fantastic answer is addressed in Wonder of the Worlds. I wanted to show who Tesla really was, what he accomplished, what he gave to us, and why he was stopped from giving us more. And I didn't think a conventional biography would accomplish that. 2 excellent Tesla biographies have already been written and published, and yet Nikola Tesla still remains unknown. Sometimes the truth is best expressed, appreciated, and realized not in a recounting of facts, but in a dramatization of those facts to show their essence, to show the principles and values that give life to those facts. So I decided that I would attempt to dramatize the life of Nikola Tesla to show the essence of what his biographer Margaret Cheney called him, a man out of time. And indeed he was. Tesla was of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. His character seemed to be something right out of science fiction, but he was science fact. And it was in Tesla's friendship with Mark Twain that I discovered the idea of a dramatic storyline which, although fictional, had much fact to it. So, now here's Mark Twain, the great American humorist, in Tesla's lab circa 1895. I had been studying Mark Twain's life and literature for nearly 20 years before I even found out that Nikola Tesla had existed and that he knew Mark Twain. I was shocked that I had never come across even a mention of Tesla in any of the huge number of Mark Twain books I had read. Books written both by Mark Twain himself and by scholars who were experts in Mark Twain's life and literature. This kind of blackout of historical information can only happen as the result of a massive conspiracy. And I realized that. And that realization led me onward into investigating Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla. In recent years, since there's been a small resurgence of interest in Tesla, led by such writers as Margaret Cheney and David Hatcher Childress, there has been some official recognition of Tesla among Mark Twain scholars. The recent biography, Inventing Mark Twain, briefly mentions that Mark Twain knew Nikola Tesla. On the other hand, the most recent biography, Mark Twain, A Life, highly praised by filmmaker Ken Burns, makes no mention of Tesla at all. Yet the historical facts prove that Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla not only knew each other and were friends, but that Tesla actually influenced some of Mark Twain's thinking in later years. Indeed, Mark Twain's mysterious stranger stories were based upon Nikola Tesla's boyhood experiences. Incidentally, I find it very interesting that although Mark Twain has been used as a character in science fiction a number of times because of his larger-than-life archetypal persona as well as for him having written some fantasy science fiction himself, Mark Twain has never before been used as a character in a science fiction novel about Nikola Tesla. Yet the first thing I recognized a number of years ago when I first learned of Twain and Tesla's friendship was its untapped potential as a premise for a science fiction story. In fact, I considered a Twain-Tesla story to be the definitive science fiction tale for the Mark Twain character. Perhaps the reason this potential has never been fulfilled until now has been because of the general suppression of Tesla and his ideas, which I'll be discussing further. So today I'd like to tell you about my novel and how its fictional storyline is inextricably intertwined with real historical people, places, events, and technologies, all real, all fantastic, and all a source of wonder. Wonder of the Worlds is written as if its events really happened, but were kept secret from the public. It begins with a prologue set at the time of Nikola Tesla's death. A manuscript, apparently written by Mark Twain, is discovered in Tesla's safe. It appears to have been hidden away and kept secret for many years. Some of Mark Twain's real writings were withheld from publication for decades after his death, and the literary executors of Twain's estate still, to this day, withhold from publication some of Mark Twain's original manuscripts. So my fictional story resonates with these real acts of literary suppression. It's through the manuscript discovered in Tesla's safe that the main story of Wonder of the Worlds is told. It's a first-person account of something that happened to Mark Twain while he was visiting Chicago in the year 1893, just before the official opening of the Chicago World's Fair. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893 certainly was a place of wonder, the likes of which had never been seen before in our recorded history. Its official name was the Columbian Exposition, and it was a commemoration of the discovery of America by Columbus 400 years earlier. Here at the Chicago World's Fair, it seems like every staple of 20th century life made its debut. Everything from Cracker Jack to the Ferris wheel to outdoor electrical lighting. It was here at the Chicago World's Fair that Frederick Jackson Turner announced that the American frontier was closed and that Nikola Tesla demonstrated that the mind of man was wide open, ready to explore new frontiers in space and time. Now, the real Mark Twain really was in Chicago that spring of 1893. Twain had already invested a fortune in the Page typesetter. Mark Twain had come to Chicago that spring of 1893 to supervise the demonstration of the Page typesetter before a group of potential investors. But then Mark Twain meets unexpectedly with Nikola Tesla. This is also something that really happened. Mark Twain really did meet with Tesla while he was there in Chicago. What might have happened during that meeting between Twain and Tesla? And during the next 11 days, when we are told that Mark Twain was in his hotel room, confined to his bed with a cold. Was that true? Or did something else really happen? The fictional premise of Wonder of the Worlds is that something else really did happen, and that it involved Mark Twain, Nikola Tesla, Tesla's secret inventions, and the planet Mars, and that what really happened was such political dynamite, it had to be kept secret from the public. So what might have secretly happened during that meeting between Twain and Tesla? That question was the beginning of the writing of the novel for me. And when I allowed my imagination to run free, I received an answer. There's a knock at the door, and when Mark Twain opens it, he finds standing in the threshold the rotund figure of Stephen Grover Cleveland, 22nd and now 24th President of the United States of America. Well, here's an interesting development. What's President Cleveland doing here? It's true that President Cleveland was in Chicago that spring of 1893, on May 1st at the grand opening of the World's Fair, President Cleveland turned the electrical switch that powered all the lights and machinery on the fairgrounds. But that happened a couple of weeks later. What's President Cleveland doing here now at the door of Mark Twain's hotel room? President Cleveland, my imagination tells me, has come to Chicago incognito, and with the help of the actor Joseph Jefferson, has secured an exact double of himself to appear as president in Washington, D.C., while he, the real Cleveland, is here in Chicago on this secret mission. This is also something based on factual history. Tesla and Mark Twain were friends with Joseph Jefferson, the actor famed for portraying Rip Van Winkle. Mark Twain knew President Cleveland and was one of his political supporters. And most interestingly, President Cleveland was very close friends with Joseph Jefferson. So all four of these men actually knew each other. If any of you have ever heard the story of President Richard Nixon showing up all alone late one night at Jackie Gleason's front door, and the president taking the comedian to see little men in glass cases at Homestead Air Force Base, you'll know where I got the idea for this scene of President Cleveland showing up at Mark Twain's door. President Cleveland takes Tesla and Twain down to the lobby and out a back entrance of the hotel. But in the lobby, two newspaper reporters, a man and a woman, spot Mark Twain going out the back way and follow him. Now, who were these two newspaper reporters? Because of the requirements of my fictional storyline, I wanted one of them to be a man and the other one to be a woman. And I needed them to be real historical people because, as I said, I wanted my fictional story to seem like something that could have really happened. I wanted my fictional storyline to nest so seamlessly into known historical events that one would be able to say, there's nothing to prove that this didn't happen. I wanted my fictional storyline to be so well crafted historically that it would be written almost on the level of a hoax. I knew I wouldn't have a problem in finding a historically real person to fill the role of the male reporter, for there were a lot of male newspaper reporters in Chicago in 1893. But the female reporter, who could she be? I knew I had a problem. I realized that it was very possible that there weren't any women reporters in Chicago in 1893. I knew I was going to have to do some digging in my historical research. Initially, for working purposes, I came up with the name Lily West for the woman reporter. Lily was popular in the 1890s. I thought of Lily Langtry and Lillian Russell, and West because I wanted my character to be a real Old West adventuress and sharpshooter, like Annie Oakley. But then I dropped Lily West and gave my character another name. I thought Lily West sounded a bit too contrived. But as I went back to do my historical research, I found with relief that there was one woman reporter in Chicago in 1893 after all, and she was the right age and everything. Her name, I found, was Amy Leslie. Here's a photograph of Amy Leslie taken in her middle age. I've been unable to obtain a photo taken in her youth, circa 1893. I had a lot of difficulty finding information of any kind on Amy Leslie. She proved to be extremely obscure for a historical personage. But I dug deeper and finally hit pay dirt, so to speak. I finally got the full biography of Amy Leslie and information on her writings, and I even found out that she was a bird hunter and sharpshooter, just like I had imagined for my fictional character. The way she matched my fictional character was almost too good to be true. And then I found out that Amy Leslie was only her pen name. Her real name was Lily West. Yes, Lily West. Whether my prescient awareness of the name Lily West was mere coincidence, synchronicity, or a real instance of extrasensory perception, I knew I had found my woman reporter. This was the first, but not the last instance in writing Wonder of the Worlds, where my imagination would anticipate real facts, which I would later discover through historical research. This intertwining and intermingling of fact and fiction became so fuzzy at times, it made me wonder which parts of my story really were fictional. And I'll confess to you all here today that I still have the lingering feeling and vague suspicion that perhaps some kind of unusual incident really did happen to Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla that spring of 1893, that they kept it a secret, and that my fictional story was the result of me tuning in through the faculty of intuition or extrasensory perception on this real secret event, the secret event to which my fictional story referred. An example of this was when I decided to make George Ade the male newspaper reporter in my story. When I began my researches, I knew very little about George Ade, only that he was one of the top newspaper reporters in Chicago in 1893 and the right age at the time of my story. Here's a photograph of George Ade, also in middle age. Like Lily West, I found that George Ade was a difficult person to research. He's a writer that is almost completely forgotten today. Football fans might recognize his name. A stadium is named after him at Purdue University, his alma mater. Now, as I began researching George Ade, I found some very unusual things. The fictional male newspaper reporter I had conceived for my story is friends with the woman reporter, and their friendship has definite romantic overtones. I also imagined that this fictional male reporter was a big admirer of Mark Twain's writings, so much so that Twain's writings actually inspired him to become a newspaper man and aspiring novelist. Those were the imaginary characteristics of my imaginary male newspaper reporter. So, what do you think I found when I began researching the life of George Ade? First of all, I found that he knew Lily West, that they were friends, and that there were definite romantic overtones to their friendship. Lily West was very much attracted to George Ade. According to historian Finis Farr, Lily West would have been happy to have become Mrs. George Ade. Now, after I found that out, I discovered that George Ade was a big admirer of Mark Twain's writings. Ade had read Twain's books as a boy and was inspired to become a writer, just like I had imagined for my fictional character. But it gets even better. I discovered that George Ade created a Mark Twain literary club devoted to reading and discussing Twain's books. And then I found out that George Ade once met Mark Twain and spent a whole afternoon talking with him. And finally, I discovered that George Ade was invited to and attended Mark Twain's 70th birthday party. So here were all the characteristics of my fictional reporter embodied in a real historical personage, and I knew I had found my male newspaper reporter. When I was researching George Ade, I called the library at Purdue University, and the man to whom I spoke was extremely helpful. He located the exact books I needed for my research and promised to send me photocopies of the information I needed, which he did most promptly. But the next day, after I spoke with this Purdue University librarian, I received an excited phone call. It was from the same man, the librarian at Purdue. He said, "I was driving home yesterday, listening to Garrison Keillor on the radio, and he announced that it was George Ade's birthday." Yes, indeed. I should make clear that I definitely did not know that on the day before, when I called the library at Purdue, which was February 9th, that it was George Ade's birthday. The Purdue University librarian was floored by the coincidence, but I already recognized that I had entered some kind of synchronistic network, although, of course, I didn't tell him that. There's more to this February 9th George Ade birthday that I'll get back to discussing in just a little bit. Ernest Hemingway is often quoted as saying, "All American literature begins with one book, Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain." But when we look at the literary works of such writers as Hemingway and Fitzgerald, the realist writers of the early 20th century, we see that their works were more directly influenced by such turn-of-the-century writers as Theodore Dreiser. Dreiser's novel Sister Carrie has a narrative passage in it that is nearly a word-for-word quote from a short story that was written a few years earlier by George Ade. So it was really the realist writers of the Chicago School that had a more direct influence on modern American realist literature. And the most important writer among them was George Ade, whose novels Artie and Pink Marsh were admired by William Dean Howells and, ironically, Mark Twain himself. So we could see that George Ade was a realist writer and that his writings were invariably realistic, with the exception of 3 short pieces I discovered. 3 short stories written as burlesques of boys' adventure tales. In these 3 stories, I found a number of odd features. The use of electric ray guns, anti-gravity bicycles, and other science fiction inventions, and all written about in the 1890s by a realist writer who never wrote of such fanciful things before or after. The storylines of these 3 tales all concern the theft of a secret invention involving some kind of fantastic technology. There were other references in these stories, quite obscure, which seemed to point to Joseph Jefferson, Nikola Tesla, and, strangely, the magician Harry Houdini. I had intended to include Houdini in my story, and now here I find George Ade writing about a boy hero who is a messenger and who is locked in chains, thrown in a river, and escapes. Houdini was a messenger when he was a boy. It certainly is possible that George Ade knew Houdini and saw him perform. Both George Ade and Houdini were in Chicago in 1893, and Ade often wrote about the dime museums where Houdini appeared. But in the 1890s, the Escape Act as an archetype had not yet been established. The Escape Act was made famous by Houdini after 1900. In the 1890s, Houdini was performing his escapes, but in obscurity. So I think when George Ade wrote about this boy hero escape artist, he must have been thinking specifically of Houdini. So here were Houdini-like and Tesla-like characters and stories about the theft of a secret invention, just like the story I had already imagined for my novel. In one of these 3 George Ade science fiction short stories, one of the 2 main characters was named Alexander. The other main character was named Cyril. I wondered, could there be some hidden meaning to these names of Alexander and Cyril, especially Cyril, which sounded a bit unusual for a boy hero's name? When I researched the name Cyril, I found that the day for Saint Cyril, who was the Archbishop of Alexandria, is February 9th, George Ade's birthday. It seems here that George Ade was making a coded reference to the suppression of ancient knowledge as symbolized by what happened during the time of Saint Cyril in Alexandria, the killing of the Neoplatonic philosopher Hypatia in 415 AD. All this within the context of a boy's adventure tale about stolen secret technology. This was the theme of my novel, Wonder of the Worlds, the suppression of ancient knowledge and its development as modern secret technology. Well, I had definitely found my male newspaper reporter. I had imagined in my fictional story that the events that happened, the secret events that happened to Nikola Tesla in 1893, somehow later leaked out to H.G. Wells, who then used them as a basis for his story, War of the Worlds. So you might imagine how I felt when, as I continued to research the life of Lily West, I learned that 2 years after the Chicago World's Fair, Lily West had a romance with Stephen Crane, author of The Red Badge of Courage. In researching Crane's life, I learned that after he left Lily West in New York, he went to England and became associated with H.G. Wells. Shortly after Crane became associated with H.G. Wells, Wells wrote War of the Worlds. And even more incredible, the actor Orson Welles, who presented War of the Worlds on the radio in 1938, and who would later portray J.P. Morgan in the movie biography of Nikola Tesla, this same actor, Orson Welles, was named after George Ade. Orson Welles' mother decided to name her son after George Ade when she encountered George Ade and a friend of Ade's by the name of Orson Welles on a train journey. The full name of actor Orson Welles was George Orson Welles. Oh, and one more thing about Lily West. Shortly before Lily West died in the late 1930s, she took all her personal lifelong correspondence, placed it in a heap on her floor, and burned every scrap of it in her fireplace. Now, why would she do that? So which part of Wonder of the Worlds is fiction and which is fact? You tell me. I'm not entirely sure. It almost seems like history has anticipated every turn of my imagination, intimating through time bits of evidence, dots which seem to outline the story of Wonder of the Worlds. Did something unusual really happen to Mark Twain that spring of 1893? Something in which Nikola Tesla and George Ade and Lily West and Harry Houdini were also involved? Something so strange that it has been kept secret to this very day? I don't know. All I can say is, if you stop and think about it, 11 days is an awfully long time to nurse a head cold. I studied Mark Twain's notebooks for that 11-day period, and he wrote almost nothing. Mark Twain was always writing something, even when he was in bed. Maybe he was really, really sick. Now, let's return to my fictional story. We now have Nikola Tesla, Mark Twain, and President Cleveland sneaking out the service entrance of the Great Northern Hotel in Chicago, with George Ade and Lily West following behind. George and Lily follow Tesla, Cleveland, and Twain south of the city, past the fairgrounds, to a large warehouse on the shore of Lake Michigan. There, our two reporters observe Mark Twain, with Tesla and Cleveland at his side, piloting an airship out of the warehouse and over the moonlit waters of Lake Michigan. Thus begins Wonder of the Worlds, an adventure that will take Nikola Tesla, Mark Twain, George Ade, Lily West, and Harry Houdini on a quest to recapture Tesla's stolen invention, a crystal capable of extracting unlimited electrical power directly from the ether. So if you're interested in Nikola Tesla and his inventions, or the anomalies on Mars, such as the giant face so widely discussed by Richard C. Hoagland, or you just like a good story with interesting characters, then you'll want to read Wonder of the Worlds. I put a lot of ideas in the novel, so those of you who like to do your own thinking above the level of the obvious will also be entertained. Wonder of the Worlds presents the premise that Nikola Tesla, although an innovative genius, was not working alone, but was in contact with some secret source of knowledge. Others have suggested this idea, most notably Lionel Fanthorpe and James McCaney. McCaney claims that Tesla was in possession of the Colburn Bible. Well, I do think if you study Tesla's life, you do find a lot of telltale evidence suggesting that he was in contact with some secret source of knowledge. In Wonder of the Worlds, I embody this source as a secret society called the Order of the Flaming Sword. It makes contact with Tesla through a mysterious personage referred to only as the man in the silk hat. This mysterious figure gives Tesla a book filled with arcane knowledge. I based the man in the silk hat on Mark Twain's Mysterious Stranger, and as I noted earlier, Mark Twain based his Mysterious Stranger on Nikola Tesla's boyhood experiences. It's my view that human society is shaped by a system of control that is informed by a corpus of secret advanced knowledge. When we look at our historical record, we see thousands of years of relative non-development, technologically speaking, and then the last 150 years of intense development. We see in ancient written records and artifacts proof that the technology developed in the 19th and 20th centuries existed as undeveloped knowledge in ancient times. We have statements from great thinkers crediting their innovations to ancient sources. Sir Isaac Newton said that the ideas in his Principia were known to the ancient Egyptian priests who knew the very secrets of the cosmos. And where did the ancient Egyptians acquire their knowledge? It came down to them from Atlantis. For thousands of years, the Atlantean corpus was suppressed from public knowledge and then released incrementally over the last few centuries. Here's a clear picture of a secret system controlling humanity, suppressing our development for thousands of years, and then suddenly and secretly seeding ideas into our world and stimulating our development along very specific lines and no others. Could the real Nikola Tesla have been in contact with some secret source of knowledge like this? I think that he very well may have been. But unlike other historical personages that have been credited with inventions, when they really were only the managers responsible for releasing secret knowledge to the public, I think that Tesla really did invent the machines that he patented. But the question is, were his uncanny methods for making his inventions somehow influenced by or connected to the control system which shapes the development of the human race? Yes, Tesla had extraordinary mental capabilities, but were they natural endowments, or were they the result of some kind of mental and biological engineering in his infancy and childhood carried out by the control system? Could Tesla have been developed in an even more subtle way by the secret control of his lineage, the literal control of the breeding of his ancestors? Could Tesla have been developed by this control system specifically for the purpose of him inventing alternating current so that it would be introduced into our civilization at the particular juncture of the late 19th century, this to fulfill some kind of inscrutable timetable for developing our world into a technological, computerized society? If so, then Nikola Tesla would have found himself in direct conflict with the control system which had created him when he began going beyond his alternating current technologies to invent new technologies that would empower and liberate the individual, not only from the control system, but from the fundamental constricts of space, time, life, and death. And the basis for all of Tesla's new liberating technologies was his discovery of the phenomenon of longitudinal electricity. This is an electrical sound wave moving in the ether at a speed faster than light. If you think about it, the mechanism of gravity can be modeled as a series of concentrically nested spherical standing waves in the ether. Thus, gravitational attraction would be caused by objects being pushed to less dense regions of etheric space. If this is the way gravity works, then Tesla's longitudinal electricity is the stuff of artificial gravity. depending on the frequency and intensity of power, longitudinal electricity can, through constructive or destructive interference, increase, decrease, nullify, or reverse the force of the natural gravitational field. According to rumors, Tesla used this technology to design airships and possibly even to use an anti-gravity platform to monitor his Colorado Springs experiments. As I mentioned earlier, in the 1890s, people from San Francisco sighted mysterious airships flying across the sky from San Francisco to Chicago. And in Wonder of the Worlds, I give one possible explanation for what might have been going on there. Perhaps the most complex application of longitudinal electricity is the movement of macroscopic bodies at superluminal speeds, what some people refer to in science fiction as teleportation, like the Star Trek transporter. Apparently, Tesla discovered this function in 1899 at Colorado Springs, when he discovered that the interior of his experimental station became filled with a foggy mist. And upon investigating this phenomenon, he concluded that he was receiving seawater from the Indian Ocean at the antipode of his Colorado transmitter. Now, this technique of transmitting actual material on longitudinal waves was later used at his Shoreham facility. We could see that there are a series of spiral configurations here, and I, in my study of geomorphology, determined that Tesla had rediscovered the technology used in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And he cited his Shoreham facility there specifically because of the shape of the land masses. Now, in the Philadelphia experiment, apparently Tesla's ideas were given another tryout. There they used two symmetrical gravity fields, one at the Philadelphia Navy Yard and the other at Newport News, Virginia. And you can see how the east coast of the United States is elastically deformed in a great bend stretching from east of Massachusetts down through the site of the Statue of Liberty, the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and Newport News, Virginia. And this shows that the Navy scientists were actually using the principles that Tesla had discovered. And I discuss this in detail in my book, The Handprint of Atlas. In Wonder of the Worlds, Tesla invents a device called a master crystal, which exploits piezoelectricity, crystallography, and exotic metallurgy. And this, of course, is a free energy device, very similar to the type that you probably have heard about. One example is his Pierce Arrow automobile experiment, where he ran an automobile on free energy. Now, J.P. Morgan discovered what Tesla was using there at Shoreham, the whole idea of free energy, and he decided to shut Tesla down. It conflicted with his aims with the oil industry and alternating current. So he decided to make Tesla a non-person. And this shows how money can distort and falsify our perception of reality. This distortion reached to the pen of Mark Twain and stilled its motion. Just as Mark Twain might have begun writing about Tesla in the mid-1890s, J.P. Morgan became intensely suspicious of Tesla's work with longitudinal electricity, and he decided to make Tesla a non-person in history. So Mark Twain simply could not write about Nikola Tesla. And how did Tesla feel about this? Well, I think that Tesla fully understood the pressure that Mark Twain was under and accepted Mark Twain's omission of their friendship from the historical record as a political reality. Nikola Tesla was forgotten by the world, but his alternating current system lived on and lives on today, making our lives possible. I don't think Tesla would have viewed this as a tragedy at all, but as his greatest success. For if in writing Wonder of the Worlds I found any key to Nikola Tesla's character, it was his love of his work, that above all. And ultimately, his work was an expression of his love for his fellow man and a sincere desire to improve the human condition. His inability to give free energy to the world was not because of a failure in his technical conceptions, but because he was only a single individual struggling against a world control system which would not allow the existence of infinitely abundant, freely accessible energy. So that is why most people today have never heard of Nikola Tesla, and why Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla's friendship was censored out of our history books. The fantastic friendship of Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla was a fantastic reality that shaped their lives and our lives. If you read my novel, Wonder of the Worlds, you will find Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain meeting at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, the place where the 20th century began. You will find that they become locked in a conflict with the people of Mars, and you will find reporters George Ade, Lily West, and magician Harry Houdini becoming involved with that conflict. My story begins in the historical reality and then simply asks, what if? And who knows? Maybe something like this might have actually happened. Some parts of my story are fiction, some parts are fact. It'll be up to you to unravel and decide which is which. It's a puzzle and an adventure, and I hope you decide to embark upon it. It begins just inside the front cover of my novel, Wonder of the Worlds. Thank you.